Welcome back for another episode of Risk Check Podcast. The gang's back together again. Tonight, we have a very special guest. Very, very, very special guest.
Very, very special.
Friend of the pod.
Yes.
Friend of the crew.
Yes.
Rotimi.
Thank you for having me.
Hailing all the way from Ottawa, Canada. OVO Nation. I'm sure you heard a lot of Kendrick Lamar outside playing.
Oh, yeah.
The record is still popping, but there's no hostility here. I can assure you on that.
Fingers crossed.
So tonight, we're going to talk to you about, obviously, your story, how you arrived here. And here we're talking about is this really, really cool watch brand that you started. Rotimi has known us for a little bit. Remotely. This is the first time we actually met in person.
Yes.
But we've gone back and forth probably over the last maybe year and a half, almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Talking to you about your timepieces. You sent us some in the past. And we finally have you here in New York City with us tonight. And we're going to get into the brand and some of the hardware. But you've seen the show.
Yes, sir.
As is tradition, we start with our honorable wrist check.
Yep.
And the person who kicks it off happens to be on your right, Mr. Smith. What's on the wrist tonight, sir? What do you got for us?
So I'm wearing a very, very special timepiece, as they all are.
Yeah.
Right? I am wearing the calendar midnight edition.
Woo!
Courtesy of Sovereign Watches.
Respect.
I absolutely love this watch. We covered your timepieces a few months back. And I mean, the bang for buck that you get for this watch can be had at $650. Complete calendar, basically tells day, date, month, has the power reserve, which displays 40-hour power reserve. I mean, you stack this up against any other brand and they're charging how much more? We talked about it before, and Rotimi has actually challenged the watch industry, I think, with this timepiece here.
Yes,
It's a solid piece for several reasons. I mean, we'll get into tonight. The build quality is very impressive. Additionally, the fact that you're able to deliver an experience of a complicated timepiece at the price point that you do, I think is something that enthusiasts go crazy about.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm interested in exploring a little more about how this came about and some of the other pieces that you brought with you tonight. Because you're our guest, I'll save you for last because I see you got something special on the wrist. I am repeating a watch this evening. I'm wearing my trusty Tudor Black Bay 58.
Cleaned it up a bit.
I cleaned it up a bit. I haven't worn this thing in a while because it was 3 years worth of patina on this thing. And I'll share some pictures of like the before and after, but I had a couple of hours where I just wanted to like kind of relax and like get into something. So I said, I'm going to clean this watch. And I'm actually surprised by how much of it I was able to actually bring back to its original state. And it's grown on me again,
Oh, I want to ask, because you text me in how you cleaned the watch.
Yes.
You use ketchup?
I use ketchup. So 3 years worth of patina, this thing got really, really dark.
Is it bronze?
It's bronze, full bronze, case, bracelet. And I mean, it was like almost like fully like slate gray. Like it was crazy.
Holy.
And I had tried a bunch of different things. Nothing worked. And I came across an article where this guy was like, yo, ketchup actually works. And at first I was like, this is one of those things where someone's really just trying to get you to do something ridiculous.
Yeah.
But when I looked into it, the mixture of the salt with the vinegar and the acid from the tomato with water does a number on it. So I sat it in that for maybe an hour, took a toothbrush, scrubbed it. I also did like a lemon juice, baking soda bath, and then I finished it off with like these like Alka-Seltzer tablet things. And it took almost all of, I mean, this thing, it's actually patinaed again over the last couple of days because when I was done with it originally, it almost looked white gold.
Wow.
Like it was like really white.
Really?
Yeah. Bronze is a very interesting metal. They say it's a living metal, but just interesting. you got something special on the wrists.
Yes.
This is a sovereign piece. I've never seen this piece before, and I'm digging the strap combo.
So I always liked blue, like even with the light behind me. That was why I chose the blue color as well. But this is the sovereign calendar aqua blue.
Yeah.
Comes on a rose gold bracelet, but also comes with a free leather strap. I have it on a buckle, but the strap comes with a deployment clasp, so I find that's more classy than the buckle. But yeah, this is one of my favorites from the collection, especially in the summer because it's very, very eye catching. I remember sometime maybe in February, I was going in a mall and there was a guy who had a Cartier Santos and he saw the strap and he went up the escalator, came down, and he was like, "What's that?"
That's
And I'm like, yeah, it's mine. And we just talked about watches and caught up. But yeah,
Wow.
this is the Sovereign Calendar Rose Aqua Blue.
That's got to feel good too, right? That's a nice flex. Someone's like, "Yo, what watch is that?" And you're like, "I made this."
Yeah.
It's huge. It's different.
That's huge.
Yeah, and I used to spend a lot of time in Miami, so it was just like it was only right I did a Miami, like
Of course.
blue color.
I like that.
This episode of WCP is sponsored by Bezel, a trusted marketplace for buying and selling watches. With over 18,000 and counting watches listed from both private sellers and professional dealers, you have your pick of the litter from brands like Rolex, AP, Patek, and more. Bezel is one of the highest rated marketplaces for watches. Inside the Bezel app, you can make offers on watches, buy them outright, bid at auction, all with confidence knowing each timepiece is authenticated by an in-house team of experts. For more information, visit getbezel.com or search Bezel in the App Store and download the app today. So, you're from Ottawa.
Yes, sir.
In Canada. You know, starting a watch brand is not an easy thing, right? We know people who have done it, many who have failed, others who, by the grace of the universe, have been successful. All of them nut jobs. Like, I want to ask you first, where did the passion for timepieces come from?
Man, I think so. One of my friends just got engaged recently, and my earliest memories of my passion for timepieces came from, I think, also when I was in kindergarten. And I remember we had exchanged timepieces, and he's got missing afterwards, and that was a whole big thing. But after that, it's just something that kept on growing on me, like even from like right into high school and all these things. And back home when I was in high school, everyone had to wear uniforms and all those things. But for me, the timepieces were just a way for me to stand out. And I always wanted to make sure like nobody's timepiece was better than mine. So I'd always have something crazy on the wrist. And good thing Ben's not here today because one brand I really like was Tag. And I was like, yeah, this guy's going to give me shit for this. But, I really liked Tag because it was one of those brands I always saw, but I could never afford that in high school. So when I moved to Canada, I had a BlackBerry, I think it was a BlackBerry Torch at the time. And
I remember that.
Yeah.
So
you aging yourself.
Yeah, so I had one of those and I got an iPhone shortly afterwards and I needed to sell the BlackBerry. There's this website called Kijiji. It's kind of like Craigslist. So I discovered that and I sold the BlackBerry on there. And I had a few watches in my collection at the time. And I was like, okay, if I could buy these watches from the US and I know they wouldn't be available in Canada, I could always sell them on that website. So I started doing that in high school.
Oh, wow.
Sold quite a number of watches, probably over 100 watches by the time I was done like university.
Wow.
Crazy collection. So I also started helping my friends like find watches at the time. Shout out to my dad and my mom for.
And what brands were these? What's some of the brands that you were looking at?
So my very first watch I bought when I came to Canada was a Swatch, but it was a chronograph.
Okay.
Yeah, that watch I had to go on a mission to pick it up because UPS delivered it like to a whole completely different city, and I didn't realize how far away it was.
Wow. Do you still have it?
No, I gave it to someone. I had like this thing on my Facebook posts. This was way back, maybe like 2013, and it was a picture of a car and the crown of a Tag watch. And I basically was just like, if anyone can identify it, I'll give them that watch, the Swatch. And one of my friends was able to identify it, so I gave that to him. But I've had some like fashion watches, like the whole range from Swatch, Guess, Armani, and just different brands. But one thing that always stood out to me as well was I think there was a picture of LeBron James I saw where he was modeling the LeBron AP.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, that would be nice. So I started looking into it. And I noticed a lot of athletes at the time were like modeling watches. And I'm like, I'm wondering how they got into it. And I didn't realize at the time this is just for famous people or celebrities. So I started taking classes for like modeling and all these different things. And I got into that. I started taking pictures. I had a Citizen Navihawk AT that was very, very, very complicated. Bulova Precisionist. I think it was 98B103 or something like that.
Okay.
Crazy complicated piece as well. That was one thing that I always gravitated towards as well, because I'm an engineer. Watches. Yeah, so looking at the watches, I always gravitated more towards like the complication. I think I only maybe had one dive watch in my entire time of collecting. The rest were either like chronographs or very complicated watches. But yeah, back to the story. So I started collecting watches after university. I had a website where I was selling for other brands. So just selling for third parties. I was selling jewelry as well on there. And the whole logistics of everything, someone could want one thing and it wasn't available. One of my friends wanted an Orient once, and I scoured the internet and couldn't find it for him. And after a while, I was like, I don't like this, not being able to find these things when people need them, because I know how I am when I need or want a watch.
So would you start like sourcing them watches?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after a while, I closed that website down and then started looking into how to like get my own stuff started. So I discovered like Kickstarter and all these other brands that had used Kickstarter to like grow their brand.
That's interesting. So essentially, you fell in love with watches. You wanted to, and what's funny about this is kind of something that a lot of collectors do.
Yeah.
You buy a watch, you want to experience another watch, you sell that watch, you buy another watch.
Yep.
Right? So you're flipping, but not in the sense of like what a lot of people think about flippers today.
Yeah.
But you're flipping for the experience of watches. And somehow, some way, this experience leads you down a path where you're like, well, if I'm going to flip watches, maybe I should make my own.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It was crazy. And I think I was discussing with one of my friends, like the process of going from flipping to like starting my own brand, there was not much logic in there. It just sort of
that's crazy
happened like in a process. Like I couldn't really write down and say that, okay, this is how I started.
So, but what happened that made you go, you know what? Forget this. I want to do my own thing.
So because of my background in engineering, so one of the things I learned to do back home was building designs. And my dad always told me how you do one thing is how you do every other thing. And so I always went above and beyond when it came to like doing things. So if I'm drawing, maybe I have assignments to like do like the floor plan of a building. I would always maybe look at other buildings in the school, and maybe I'll be in my classroom and mentally force myself to be able to visualize or bring that building into like a 3D, 2D space in my mind and draw the plan for it. So that allowed me to start developing that spatial creativeness and being able to like visualize things very well. And based off of that and my experience with like engineering drawing, going to school for engineering as well, I was able to like put all those things together, and I was like, okay, I can see there's some passion here, there's some talent here for like visualization and drawing. Let me put all of that together and start, seeing what I can put together. And unfortunately, I no longer have any of my books from school. But if you flip through the pages, if you could find any of those things, if you flip through the pages, you would find sketches of like watches in a lot of my books. And,
oh wow!
Yeah.
So that's what I was gonna ask, because I think with people like yourself that like create and engineer and design, like our good friend Ini, who we've had on the show, you guys look through a lens that, as you're speaking, I'm like, I don't think my mind could compute to turn something into 3D, flip it around, and you kind of like create. So what were your early watch designs like you're referring to? What did they look like? Were you still kind of channeling that 70s octagonal angles, asymmetry? Like what was your early designs like?
A lot of the time, it was usually just the circle and the chronograph. So now for the brand, it's more of just an octagonal shape, like we can see with all those watches here. And part of that inspiration came from, so the teacher who was teaching me design at the time, he told us a story about how he was, I think when he was in college, he had to design a swimming pool. And usually a lot of the swimming pools you see are just rectangular or like oval shaped. And he talked about how he just went one day and decided to just let his mind be. And he had like an epiphany where he could draw something that was very, very different from everything else that existed at the time. My creative process is very similar, where I make the intention that, okay, I want to do this, and I just let my mind go crazy. Usually when I'm going on walks, a lot of the time you'd see me like just thinking or like talking to myself. And based off of that,
it's funny when he was saying it, I was thinking about Russell Crowe's Beautiful Mind.
Yeah, that was a great movie.
Yeah. Little Rain Man.
So I took some inspiration from that, and just from what that teacher told us about that story, and I was like, okay, if I want to do this, I want to make sure it's different and it stands out from every other thing that's out there, like almost every other which has like a circle face.
So let me ask you, because to Rashawn's point, there is, from a historical perspective, there's like some 70s influence. Were you actually referencing like vintage 70s themes watches, or did this octagonal shape kind of just come to you?
This just came to me. I also had a bit of influence from AP as well.
Okay. So that's a reference point. Yep.
Yeah. So part of it was like inspiration from AP as well. The vintage pieces I wasn't very, very, very familiar with. Like I would see a lot of them on the internet and stuff like that, but it wasn't really something I really gravitated towards. But yeah, a lot of the designs are there's no linear process to them. It's just, okay, maybe I get inspiration for this today and for that, this completely different thing.
So you're almost like, it's almost like a distilling process, right? You're contemplating, you're working on separate parts.
Yeah.
They come to you, and then at the end of the process, you're taking all of these samples and putting them together in like one cohesive piece.
Exactly. I think the closest analogy I can make to it right now would be, it's just the same way Hove talks about, when he's like not writing raps, it's just like putting pieces together slowly, and then eventually like
it comes together. Exactly. It's like magic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think even just watching the show, it's like Rashawn, for example, you could see he goes, it's almost like in a flow state when he's asking like very philosophical questions, and you can tell
watches you.
There's like deep thoughts in it. And even for you as well, it's like communication.
Yeah.
Like you could tell like it's almost like a flow state where everything just flows now.
100%.
So I remember there was a day I became very aware of it. And usually when I'm doing my designs, I usually do them with pencil and paper. And I got to a point where it almost feels like I wasn't using any physical effort. It almost felt like my hands were just going and doing its thing by itself. And it was scary and it was crazy at the same time, because I'm like, I think I finally got to that point where I'm like, okay.
It's a nice place to be when the things that you've put time and effort in, you can just exist in that space and then watch it happen.
It was a very beautiful moment, because usually in the past when I've designed things, it would usually be very conscious and very intentional.
It's like, it feels like you're forcing it.
Exactly. And I've noticed those things never turn out as good as the things where I just let my mind go, and it's just like,
So let me ask you, you decide you're going to do this venture, you come up with these amazing designs, obviously utilizing your background in engineering.
Yeah.
Where did the idea for the name come from? Why Sovereign?
So, before moving to Canada, there's a lot of backstory here. Before moving to Canada, so the school I attended in Canada was like for international students. There was a lot of Asians, Mexicans. I think we had maybe one Canadian in the school. But before moving, there was this story and stereotype of, it's just for, like, usually the Asian kids are the ones who are like top of the class, getting scholarships and all these things. And I'm like, I don't know about all of that. Like, if it's good and it's meant to be had, surely I could do it. And I've always had like a certain expectation of excellence from myself. Like even high school in Nigeria, we had something called an honors list. And as soon as I got into school, I knew about that. I was like, all right, something to work towards. And I got that. Same thing for the scholarship. Worked hard for it, got it.
There's something going on in Nigeria. Nigerians are running the world right now.
Yes.
Like everywhere we go, a lot of our guests, very accomplished men and women, Nigerian background.
Yes.
So there's something about the culture that's so rich there. And in terms of the expectations that you guys have for yourself. It's very telling. And so, and that's, I was picking up on that, which is why like Sovereign has like, it's a regal thing about it.
Yeah.
Right. So I know that I get an idea of how you view yourself.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you're talking about what you're talking about, because it's also, I know there's a level of expectations that you have for yourself.
Yeah. So a lot of that, I don't think my parents pushed me that much. And I think it's one of the things I started contemplating recently is, where did that drive come from?
Yeah.
Maybe I was born with it. I don't know. I haven't figured out the answer to that question yet. But I've always set that high standard, high bar, high expectations for myself. And there was a book I was reading recently where it said something along the lines of, there is no success without peace of mind. So when designing this, I'm like, I don't want to sell you something and I go to the bed at night wondering, oh, because the quality is not great, this guy's going to come back tomorrow asking for his money back. I didn't want any of that. Like, I wanted to build a relationship. So the name came from, so Sovereign also means like excellence or supreme quality. And when I thought about all the things that I wanted the brand to embody, I was like, okay, this sounds like a great name to like, you know, represent what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I think so far that speaks to what I've been able to accomplish, because in all the watches I've sold, and I've sold almost thousands of watches.
Woo!
Talk that talk.
Yeah, and I've never had one person, not one person, come back and say they want to return a watch, or this watch has an issue. So
I love that.
When I do it, or when I ship out a watch, or a watch gets sent out, I have peace of mind that, okay, yes, I'm confident.
You're confident in your product.
In my product. And
so let's get into the product, because I got to tell you, you know, I want to say, I don't really remember how we first came into contact. I guess it was online.
Yeah.
And we talked, and I remember us talking about doing some things and maybe reviewing the watch. And I remember checking out the watches online. I was like, oh, these are pretty cool. And then you sent us a couple.
Yeah.
And I was really, really impressed.
Thank you very much.
If you could get your hands on this thing.
Yes.
The build quality is amazing. It feels expensive.
Yes.
It feels well made.
It's all there.
It feels robust. It kind of feels like a Rolex.
Yes.
In your hands.
Yes.
Right? It's got that weight, that heft that people love to it.
Yeah.
The steel is really nice. The bracelet is very, very sleek, very sporty.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a sucker for complications. Like yourself, I love chronographs. I love calendar watches. And you kind of give everyone a little bit of the best things, right? Here's a watch with a screw down crown you can get in the water with. You have a 24-hour scale on it. You got the date, you got the day and the month. So the calendar is all there. You know what I'm saying? That 24-hour scale is your AM, PM. Then you also have the power reserve. You know, this is a lot of watch.
Yeah.
That you're able to, you know, pack into a very accessible price point.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that was the most amazing thing, because I think oftentimes when people think about, I want to get into watches, you know, they aim really, really high, which is great.
Yes.
But there's a sweet spot in the watch business where like Seiko resides.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people competing with them.
Yeah. It's you know what's very interesting in what you said, which, you know, I have to give you your credit, is the fact that although this watch is extremely complicated, it's the perfect watch for the novice, because the watch tells you everything.
Everything.
So if you can't read, I'm sorry, I'm just saying, if you can't read, then I don't know what to tell you, because this watch literally tells you everything about it. You know, for people that maybe are just getting into watches and they're like, oh, how do I set my watch, right? You may set the watch in an AM, but it's PM, and then you're like, oh, my date didn't turn.
Yes.
And then you take the watch and you're like, but here.
You've solved all the problems.
You solve all the problems for so many people that are just getting into the hobby.
Yeah, I think one of the things I always think about is, and maybe that can be I don't want to say it's a detriment to my creative process, but as an engineer, there's always that thing of wanting to make sure everything is
perfect,
basically. So when creating the watch, I was like, okay, what can I do, or what's the next thing I can do now? Like the collection before this was just a simple time only.
Right. And so what's the name of this piece? So this one is called, what's
calendar?
This is the calendar.
This is the calendar.
Yeah.
Simple. Love that. And then you've got this time only skeleton here.
Yes. So that's forged carbon stainless steel.
Oh, this is fire.
Yeah. That was just before the calendar collection.
Mm-hmm.
And that was basically a homage to like Nigeria and to my origins in Nigeria. So all the lines you can see on the dial is made from forged carbon as well, fully loomed. All the lines you see on the dial are from a part of the map of Nigeria, from the hydrochloric regions.
Oh, wow.
So when the loom gets charged up, you could see all the lines and everything in its full nature.
Wow.
So that was one of those processes as well, where I was like, okay, I want to do something. And like, I feel like every artist usually has a way to sign their work. So those lines were basically me saying, okay, I'm from Nigeria, without having a full Nigeria flag on there, saying, okay, this is...
It's like a little subtle nod.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah. So that's how that came about. The forged carbon, the case is a bit big, so that's a 42 millimeter, and I wanted something that was really light as well. So I was like, okay, let's do something different. And at this price point, I don't know that many other brands that are using forged carbon. When you start talking forged carbon, you start talking.
How much was this piece retail?
I think when that came out, it was around $400.
Crazy.
Wow.
And usually with forged carbon, when you start talking forged carbon, you start talking Richard Mille and all this other crazy pricing. So
Norcane.
Exactly. So
yeah, I mean, Norcane's probably, sorry, let me cut you off.
No worries.
Because Norcane is probably like the closest approachable price point.
Yeah.
Because you have them, and then you have like UN with like their carbonium. But like Norcane, $4,000. Then you have UN like 12,000, and then you have RM 500,000.
Yeah, let me ask you, because I'm very interested in this. You know, we've known people who have ventured out and tried to start watches.
Yeah.
I have a pretty firm grasp on the business and what happens behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And let's just keep it a buck. People get robbed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? Is it your engineering background that gives you an edge in understanding what things should cost in terms of how to achieve what you want and deliver a product that's still accessible?
When designing, I don't think too much about the price. That usually comes at the end. So my mom used to go to, so the watches are all manufactured in China. My mom started going there like way, way back in the day. And what she always told me was, if you want the crap product, they'll give it to you. If you want like the good quality stuff, they'll give that to you. And for me, I was like, okay, I'm trying to sleep properly at night. So my stuff is like top quality.
Yes.
For the pricing, that's usually almost like an afterthought. And I always wanted something where it's usually approachable for either people trying to get into the watch game or people who are already in the watch game but appreciate like good craftsmanship.
Yeah.
But I was trying to make sure I found like a good ground where it's like, okay, the business can still continue going because there's more where all this came from. So I just try to make sure that it's affordable, but also like great quality and there's great craftsmanship. And when you hold the watch or you feel it, like you can tell there's a true essence there of being like communicated through the watches.
Yeah.
Yo, you know Bezel just launched auctions?
Really?
Yeah, they did. You could bid on watches inside the app. They give you notifications on auction drops, and it's still authenticated. Oh, shoot, I won.
Yo, what you win?
Man, don't worry about me, man. Go download the app. Go visit getbezel.com.
Oh, come on, man.
In life, there are choices and options. Choices set the tone. Options change the mood. And while you aren't able to drive 2 cars, you can, however, travel with 2 watches. Introducing the Shuttle. a traveling watch case in collaboration with WCP and Wolf. Godspeed.
Available at wristcheckpod.com.
It's really incredible. The other thing that I love is, you have these companies that produce these bass movements.
Yeah.
And, some people kind of rain on their parade. Others, if you know,
Yeah.
these are high quality
Yeah.
workhorse movements.
Yes.
And I think what I really, really like is the fact that you can show sort of the flexibility or the nimbleness of some of these movements. They both have a Miyota movement.
Yeah.
You're able to not only do a time-only piece with a sub-seconds dial, but to use the same movement virtually, right? Is it the same movement? This is slightly different. This is a different,
That's a
but it's a
different one.
Miyota.
Yeah. But
But the fact that with the Miyota company, you're able to still achieve something as intricate and complicated as this. And I think it's a true testament to watchmaking. Furthermore, talking about build quality, what they're able to do in Asia.
Yeah.
And talking about movements, what they're able to do in Japan.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't cheap stuff.
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. This is high quality stuff. And you
Not at all.
figured out how to bring this to market at an accessible price point. Still a respectable price. Listen, $400 or $500 is a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
Right? I don't care which way you cut it to spend on a watch.
Yeah.
Especially when everyone has a phone in their pocket.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? So you got to really want to wear a wristwatch, and you're delivering an experience that typically costs people, what, 30 grand?
Yep.
Yes.
When you start getting into the APs, perpetual calendars, then you're talking a whole lot more money. But for this, I think it was also part of it came from my experience in collecting watches as well. Is like, okay, a lot of the watches I owned, probably, I don't think maybe I paid over $1,000 for any of them. But when I put them on, people saw them and they were like, what's that? What's that? What's that? I need one of those. What's that? What's that? So I'm like, okay, I need to bring a similar experience to the point where when you have it on your wrist, you can also tell that this is something substantial.
It feels high quality.
Yeah,
I mean, if I didn't know you and I just my first interaction with the brand, I would, because the case I'm looking at, you have an open case back, so knowing what I know about Miyota, and still even though what I know, I would say it's a $5,000 watch.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Yeah. And I think being able to do that, it also shows care for the customers as well.
100%.
Yeah. So it's just like, okay, I could do it and go crazy with it where
there's some honesty there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's also something I learned from my parents as well. And just knowing that when you do things, you do it right.
Yes.
But what's also really smart is not only is there honesty, but it also helps you actually build an audience.
Yes.
Right? So now you're in a position where you sell a watch to a person, have a great experience, they can become a sovereign collector.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a guy in London who got one. He actually couldn't wait for the final production, so he got the prototype.
Okay.
And when he got it, the review I have on my website from him, it's almost like a full A4 paper long.
Wow.
Just going on and on. So now on my social media post, he's on there every single post, like talking about how he loves the watches. Like before I get to go on there and respond to comments, he's in there like and for me, that just goes to show that, okay, this is like my work is speaking for itself now. And I think that's a place a lot of people don't get to is doing it so well enough that people can recognize it now and they can start saying, okay, yes, this is something great. But yeah, it's been a great experience. It's been a great experience. And I've spoken to a lot of my customers, a lot of people who have purchased the watches, and some people have now turned it into their daily watches. These are people who have 10, 20 watches in their collections. And it's like, okay, yet it offers everything.
Yes.
Where are most of your customers at right now?
That's what I was going to ask.
In the US.
Really?
In the US, yeah. So a lot of them customers are here. The US, Japan.
Okay.
Japan is a very, very big one for me, which was kind of surprising, but I'm still trying to figure out what happened there. How that happened.
It got in the hands of the right person. That's what happened.
Wow.
So Japan, London. Basically, I've shipped to over 20 countries, different countries.
Wow.
I had to ship to someone in Liechtenstein once.
Mm.
And for the first time, I was like, I've never heard of this place before. So I'm pulling out the map, trying to see where Liechtenstein is. And it's like a very, very small country. And I'm like, this is crazy.
That's
like,
full funny.
See how much of an impact like that work is actually having globally. It's encouraging for me because I have a lot more that I want to show, and I have a lot more that I want to bring to the watch world. And also, I think just that breaking the stereotype of, oh, this is only meant for this kind of people, or only people that look like.
And
this
that's what I love about what you've accomplished here, because listen, when you enter this hobby, in your family and in your circle, you're now the watch guy. Right? Yep. Everyone's like, hey, I've been looking for you. I got a couple of questions to ask you.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the number one questions is Black-owned brands.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so for a number of, Black and brown collectors, a big thing is, and we're talking about collectors.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Not just wanting to wear a watch. There's a very great many Black-owned watch brands.
That's correct.
But there are very few that are making mechanical watches. Most of them are quartz.
Yeah.
Great business.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it. I love a quartz watch. But, when you are a collector, sort of a connoisseur of this thing, you're looking for other experiences.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Looking for complicated watches. You're looking for mechanical watches. And here goes one that's made by someone from our community that looks like us, that's doing really not only exceptional work, but exceeding the expectations in what we have and what we can experience, and make sure that our dollar is also circulating within our community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this is, I have a great deal of respect for you.
Thank you very much.
For achieving this, because this
much.
is no small feat. So the calendar, for example.
Yeah.
How long was the process to bring this to fruition?
That took about a year.
It's quick.
That took about a year, but I think
From inception to prototype?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive.
I think part of that came from just my experience collecting watches. So I would always think about, okay, I had this particular timepiece at this particular point in time. What can I do that embodies that same thing and that same feeling I got from that timepiece? So I'll start, usually there's no conscious thought process behind it. It's usually like, okay, I think about this and I want to accomplish X, Y, Z. So like for this, for example, I wanted like the 3 sub-dials, and then the 4th sub-dial at the top, which is for the power reserve. I had a pullover once. It was a Precisionist, crazy watch. And I was like, okay, I'd like for my customers to have something like that. And what can I do to be able to bring something like that to life? So I think I was in Miami at the time, and I just thought about it, and I was like, all right, let's leave that and let the brain go to work. And I think that was one of the things I noticed as well, was I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be using my brain a lot, I have to learn about how this thing works, and so I can get the best value from it. And a lot of the time now, I'm either reading or just doing things to like build my imagination. If I'm not reading, I'm writing and all these different things. And that helped a lot in going from, okay, I want this design, I need it in X amount of time. What can we come up with? And start sketching stuff, start drawing. And usually now the process is much quicker.
When you first started, were you having to make like manufacturing trips?
No.
Really?
So that's not something I've done. Shout out to the internet. That's not something I've done.
Were they mailing you prototypes along the way?
Okay. Yeah. So it's a business that's based on a lot of trust. In order to get there, so we'd have to like go back and forth, lots of calls.
Yeah.
Lots of lost sleep. Because China is like 12 hours ahead, and everybody else is asleep at night. I'm on the phone talking to manufacturers, trying to figure out problems. And this is at the end of like a full day where like, I'm not sure how much energy is left in my brain, but shout out to my brain. So it's a whole process. And I think it's just built on trust. And I'm like, okay, I need to transfer that level of trust to my suppliers as well, to my customers as well. And over time, it's been great so far. No bad mentions, thankfully.
That's good.
And I think that's just testament to the work that has been put in and making sure that this is what I say it is. Like that name Sovereign represents excellence. It represents great quality, customer service, everything. So anyone buying from me knows that, okay, when I go here, I'm getting this level of service from this brand.
That's amazing. Because something that we had another gentleman on our show.
Yeah.
David, shout out to David.
Shout out to David,
Compass Watches.
Okay, yeah.
And
What's
he
that
used the
episode?
same words.
Yeah.
Trust.
Yeah.
Right? Because you aren't doing these factory tours. And to Perry's point, right? There's a lot of people that maybe are paying top dollar for products that they probably shouldn't in terms of like materials and how they make it.
Yep.
And so that kind of puts you as the sole proprietor at a disadvantage, puts you on a back pedal, because then clients are like, well, why is this price as much as it is?
Yeah.
Why is this? Why is that? And then you don't get the positive, affirmations that you want.
Yeah.
And something that I also wanted to touch on is you're international, man.
Global.
Global. You're global, baby. Like you're around the world. Like I know you say you're kind of surprised as how these clients have like touched you from all over the world, but could you mention like a notable where you're like, how did this bring about?
Part of it came from, I think a lot of it is word of mouth, and I mean like a few different watch groups as well. So usually when someone gets something and it's good, it's like, say for example, you try a new restaurant, for example.
Everyone's gonna tell their friends,
like
especially
telling everyone, like you're in the group chat, like we gotta try this place, that kind of thing. So I think a lot of it came from that. And usually when people buy one, I know a guy in Boca Raton, Florida, who got like 6 at the same time.
Wow.
I almost called him and I was like, yo,
what are you doing? What's wrong? It's like smashing the buy button.
He's trying to be the US door for you.
That for me was like, okay, this guy has bought before and he's seeing that this is great quality, this is great value for money.
Yeah.
I can go back here and spend my money versus going to maybe X brand where, you probably don't know who's behind the brand. You don't know the story behind the brand and all these different things. And sometimes it's some of the little things you don't think people gravitate towards that they eventually do, because some people see themselves in your story and how you've been able to like accomplish these things and get to where you are, and they can relate to that. So then they start that makes them gravitate more towards the brand. Even in my watch collecting back in when I was in high school, I remember there was this one time I was in a boarding school. And so one of the brand attributes for Sovereign now is like social impact. So like partnering with organizations to like give back to like kids in like orphanages.
Oh, it's amazing.
All these things. Thank you. And that came from learning that from my parents. And I remember once when I was in boarding school, my dad had given me pocket money and we had to make some donation to this orphanage. And deep down, because I'd been around that, just learning that from my parents, I was like, okay, there was something in my mind that just kept on going, give them everything, give them everything, give them everything. And I eventually did it. And when I go home, like when my dad like reached out, I was like, oh, this is what I spent the money on. And what's up? I need to be replenished. And I kid you not, he gave me almost 2 or 3 times that amount of money back. And for me, I'm like, this is an indication that if you're putting your dollars towards something good,
it comes back to you.
Exactly. So now for the brand, it's like, okay, how do I give back? And so I have a friend who has a foundation. I had another friend who was like trying to build, like get water to like kids in his village in Nigeria. So I partnered with both brands. Some of these people are like kids who have no parents anymore, like kids with like disabilities and all these different things. And that's always been something that was very like dear to me. So I'm like, okay, now that I'm in position to do this, I can take a portion of this and then start giving back. And
very honorable.
Yeah. It's been a great experience. in the words of Denzel Washington, you can't take it with you. So you might as well, give back to the community and have that impact, while also making sure other people who can afford these watches are happy. And I'm sure those people too will be happy to see that
100%.
their dollars
and it's
going to
continue to grow like wildfire.
Yeah, exactly.
So what's next for Sovereign? What can we expect from the brand coming up?
There's
new watches.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. First on Wrist Check Pod.
You already know. I'm going to share some pictures with you guys that you can share.
Okay.
So I'm working on there are 2 designs I'm working on now. One of them is called the Sovereign Legacy, and it's just basically like an homage, like the way this one is an homage to my origins in Nigeria. It's just an homage to my time in Canada and how it's helped me get where I am.
That's awesome.
So that's an integrated dial. It's time only, just simple classic watch. The other one is inspired by the idea of the rose that grew from the concrete. And I think it's just a testament to how I've been able to like persevere through all the odds that have been stacked against me in this process and trying to accomplish this thing. And I think that's a relatable story for almost everybody. Like if you're someone like everyone who has accomplished something knows there's always a part of it that's like an uphill battle that you have to go through before you actually see results from what you're trying to do. And I feel like that's something that's relatable to everyone. So I'll share pictures of that with you guys. Crazy piece. Both of those will probably come out early next year. And I'm trying to get some serious work done on that one because I just got a book recently. So it's the Tupac book with his poem.
This poetry, yeah.
So I got that, and I'm trying to read more of that now just to find better understand and get and get inspiration and see even if we can reach out to the family and sort of connect and see if that's something they'll be open to do. And yeah, but other than that, there's a lot more where all this came from. Man.
Yeah. Lots more. So we've got good stuff to look forward to.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you for joining us today. I am, I was very impressed when you first sent me the watch and getting to spend some time with you times 10.
Yes.
What you've accomplished is something that many of us in this community have dreamed of.
Mm-hmm.
And to see someone who really knocked it out of the park like you did.
Thank you very much.
Is very amazing. I'm very, very impressed.
Thank you very much.
We might have to talk about doing a collab watch.
Totally down for that. Totally down for that. Totally down for that. Totally down for that.
It's funny. We've been talking about doing a watch for some time, but all right, well, who do we do our first watch with?
Yeah.
Yes.
But, hearing your story, getting to know you, handling the product, I would not mind if our first watch was a Sovereign watch.
I think that.
That would be pretty tight. So
yes,
we got a lot to talk about. I want to say thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
You guys know where to find us. If you don't, let me remind you, wristcheckpod.com. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, TikTok for the children, Instagram. You look there, you'll find us, and maybe one day, as my man
metaverse,
say,
in the metaverse.
This is another episode of Wrist Check Podcast. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Peace.